Hey everybody, and welcome to my second of two videos on the Pentax MX. We're going to insert that intro right there. So the first thing we're going to look at in this camera is lens mounting and unmounting. So I happen to have a lens here. How coincidental is that I happen to have exactly the thing I need to demonstrate this? To mount the lens, you can see that there is a red dot right here. Coincidentally, there's a red dot on your lens. So what you're going to do is line them up, red dot to red dot, and then turn the lens clockwise. And you can see when it locked into place, the aperture inside of it opened. And if you stop down your aperture, that's a good way to know that it's locked into place and that your camera's aperture linkage is working correctly, because a Pentax camera of this vintage, the aperture will not be closed down if it's working properly. It should look like this if the lens is mounted properly and the aperture linkage is working properly. To unmount the lens, we simply do that process in reverse. Push this button here, because we have to unlock it, and then rotate it anti or counterclockwise. And once you get it started, you can take your finger off the lock. There we go. Now it's dismounted or unmounted. The next thing we're going to do is take a look at how to load film. So open up the back here. And here is a dummy roll of film. I'm going to show you what to do, and I'm also going to show you what happens when your film is going through the camera. So the first thing is, let's take a look at the shutter. I'm going to give this a nice slow shutter speed so you can see kind of how it works. When you look through the viewfinder and focus on your image, when you push the shutter, the mirror here that we saw earlier is going to flip up. The shutter is going to open and then close. And then after the shutter closes, you advance the film and it resets the shutter. So to load the film, pull out a leader, feed the leader into these things right here. I'm going to try to make sure that the sprocket holes are lined up. There we go. Advance the film. Advance it once more just to make sure that it's taking up. Now at this point in real life, what you would do is close the film back, because your film is one and done. If it's exposed to light, it's ruined. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you what happens as you take a picture. So each time you push the shutter, you saw the shutter open and close. Then what happens is you advance the film, and you can see as this moves through, it's being guided on by these two pins here. These two outer rails are holding it in place so it doesn't move up and down. The film sprocket here is keeping it from rotating backwards, and it's being taken up on the film spool. And as long as you have properly tightened your film after loading it, this camera, when the film back pressure plate here closes, will sandwich the film between these guide rails and do a pretty good job of keeping it flat on plane, so that each time you advance it to another image, it's flat and ready to go. So you're out taking all of your shots and getting photos of whatever your subject is, and you get to the end of your roll. So the next thing we've got to do is rewind and unload the film. To rewind the film, we push this button down here, and then we can start to rewind. Okay, so I'm going to open up the back here and show you what happens as we rewind. So we've pushed the button down, and then the rewinding process simply rewinds the film. And listen for this sound. When you hear it come off of the film take-up spool, that's how you know that you're almost done. And in real life, you would want to rewind it completely into the film cassette. Now remember, from the time you pull out your leader until the time you rewind it into your film cassette, you cannot open the camera back. If you open your camera back halfway through, you'll erase all your images. You won't be able to see anything. There's nothing to see at that point. So remember to keep your film back closed from the time you load it until the time that you have completely rewound it. Now after you've completely rewound it, you lift up the film release knob and take out your film and take it off to be developed. I'm going to leave this unrewound because I have to use it for more videos. Okay, so now what we're going to do is change the battery, and what we need for this is your Chinese 10 something or another coin. Every country has a piece of coin that will work. Put it in this slot. Well, every country except North Korea. And just unscrew the battery cap. There we go. And, oh, this one already had batteries in it. So here is the battery cap that the batteries nest into. You might be able to see that that battery cap has a minus sign on it. There we go. That minus sign tells you that the negative contact touches the battery cap. And the negative contact on these A76 batteries is the smooth side. Here's the positive, which is marked with a plus. So to load the batteries into this, we're going to put two A76 batteries. A76 are better than LR44 because LR44 don't have consistent voltage over the life of the batteries. Put them in, try to get this started here. And when you start this, it should just feed on easily. If it is hard to get this to screw on, back it out, because that might mean you've cross-threaded it, and if you cross-thread this, that's a good way to make sure you can never load a battery into your camera again. So nice and easy, right in. Give it a little bit of tug to tighten it up. And we're set, we're ready to go. We've just changed the batteries in this camera. So, a lot of people ask me about using flashes with cameras. There are two ways to use flashes. Here we have the hot shoe with the X contact, and you can stick a flash right onto the hot shoe, and on the front we also had on the bottom a PC port for an X contact for your flash, and that's if you have a flash off your camera that you want to connect with a cable. In general, keeping your flash off the camera is better. If you mount your flash on your camera and point it at your subject directly, it's a good way to make sure that every person you take a photo of looks like a wax figure, or terrified, or something like that. On top, in the middle of your camera, is about the worst place to put a flash. The exception to that being if you bounce it up and use it for bounce lighting. But typically you want to have your flash off the camera in your hand, connected either by a cable or by a remote control port or something like that. So this camera syncs at 1/60th of a second. If you have your camera at that setting, or at that setting, then the flash will trigger. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to take a double exposure with this camera, and the process for double exposures with Pentaxes is a little bit wonky. What you have to do is tighten up the film until it won't tighten anymore. Don't crank it until it makes a creaking or cracking noise, just tighten it until you feel tension. Then you're going to take your meter reading, and we'll see how to do that in a minute. And if your meter reading tells you f5.6 at 1/60th, then for a double exposure you set it to 1/125th, because you want half as much light so that you don't way overexpose your image. Holding this, you're going to take you can take the picture. Now you're going to hold this, and you're going to hold the film rewind button down. And once you have those in place, now you can advance the camera to the next frame. Take your next picture in the double exposure, advance it. Now you need to put your lens cap back on, because you have to next take a dead frame, because when you take a double exposure with that method, the film registration can be off, and if you don't take a dead frame, then you risk your double exposure now partly overlapping the next frame, and instead of having a good double exposure, you will have a ruined double exposure, and your next frame will be ruined. So remember, when you do this, always take a dead frame after your double exposure. All right, let's take a look through the viewfinder of this camera. Okay, so here's what we're looking at with the viewfinder. You can see that circle in the middle is your center weighted metering indicator. That's the darker circle. And other than that, you have a couple of other circles to help you focus. This is with this viewfinder focusing screen anyway. There we go. So looking through that viewfinder, you can see the red light. And what that's telling me is that at 1/125th of a second, I am underexposed. So let's adjust the aperture a little bit. There I am close. That's properly exposed. That's partly underexposed. That's very underexposed. This is partly overexposed and very overexposed. So what you want to do is, by using your aperture and shutter speed, get the green dot to line up next to the shutter speed you've selected. So let's change that up to 1/1000th. And can't quite get it, so 1/500th. There we go. That's it. So 1/500th, I'm very close to properly exposed, a little bit under. There we go, properly exposed there. So that's what you want it to look like. Regardless of what your shutter speed is, you want to have the green dot telling you that you are properly exposed. In the previous video, I had said that this camera has 95% frame coverage in the viewfinder and 97% magnification. What that means is that, let's imagine that what you're seeing right now is the image that's going to come back on your film. 95% frame coverage means that you're going to lose 2.5% of the image in your viewfinder on each side. Okay, so if you can imagine that 2.5% is actually being cut off. And that works because it's easier, it gives you a little bit of cropping room if you lose some of the image in your viewfinder. 0.97x magnification is pretty good, and what that means is that what you see is almost as large in your eye as it is going to be on the film. Let's talk about the entire process of going through and taking a photo with this camera. Okay? So let's say that here is the photo that you would like to take. What you do is you look through the viewfinder and you line up the scene. You're going to adjust the focus to get what you want to have in focus in focus. Okay? Next thing you're going to do is look through the viewfinder at the light meter. If it's red, then below, if it's telling you it's underexposed, you can either add more light by increasing the shutter speed, or add more light by opening up the aperture. If it tells you that it is overexposed with the red light up above, you can decrease the shutter speed to reduce light, or you can make the aperture smaller to reduce light. Once you've decided what aperture and shutter speed you want, and the green light is in the middle, then you take your picture and advance the frame. And that is how you take a picture with this camera. The light meter will only turn on once this is popped out. This turns the light meter off, putting the arm into the camera's body like that. For metering, this camera has a center-weighted meter, and when we saw that ring in the middle, I told you that was the metering ring, and what that means is that in that ring, in the center of the image, 60% of your light meter data comes from what's in that ring. The balance of the image comprises 40% of the light meter data. So if something in the middle is a little bit brighter than what's around it, then what's around it will seem a little bit darker on the image. Conversely, if something in the middle is a little bit darker, then what's around it will seem a little bit brighter in the final image. The reason for that is because the light meter sees the entire world as a flat 18% gray, which is about the same color as this backdrop here. So if you imagine this backdrop, the world is this color gray to the camera all the time, regardless of in reality it's super bright or super dark. So the light meter will figure out how to take a scene and make the image look gray, like this tone. In this camera, there's a prevalence of the center. It is a stronger amount of data going to create the composition than the rest of the image. And that means that if what is in the middle is brighter or darker than what is around it, then what's around it is going to have, it's going to be amplified how bright or dark it is. And that's a really good way of taking photos for portraits, because if you put the face of the person you're taking the portrait of in the center, then their face will be properly illuminated and properly exposed, and the rest of it will take care of itself. But the person's face is the most important part of the image. So let's talk about how to swap out the viewfinder focusing screens in this. I said that there are viewfinder focusing screens, 8 to choose from in fact. And if you should happen to swap these out, when you buy one, it should, in theory, come with a little tool to allow you to open this. There's a little clip right there, and you pull it forward, and now, there we go. The tray with the focusing screen simply tips out. You can rotate the camera to get the focusing screen out. You can do this if you want to just clean the focusing screen as well. So you don't have to do this just to swap out focusing screens. You can also do it to clean dirt off the prism if the prism in your camera is as dirty as it is in mine. So before we put the focusing screen back in, let's clean the prism. So what you want to do to clean the prism is look through the viewfinder and see if there's dirt. So grab the camera, hold it with the lens mount facing the ground, and use a rocket blower to clean out the dirt. And you can see right there, there's a bunch of the dirt that was inside my viewfinder. In the case of my camera, that dirt is mirror bumper dirt, particles that have broken off and gotten onto the prism. We're going to look, the next thing to do is look through the viewfinder and see if the dirt's been removed. So I have not fully removed the dirt from the camera. So the next thing we're going to do is take a small brush, and again holding the lens mount down towards the ground, brush off the prism. Okay, so I'm doing it here so you can see the process. But in reality, you want to brush it towards the ground. Okay, after brushing it, now take your rocket blower again, because that will have helped to make some of the dirt loose. Give it some good blasts, and let's take another look. And that is clean. There is no dirt left in the viewfinder screen. All right, so when you go to load it, what you want to do is there's a matte side and a glossy side to your screen. You should put them so that the tab is on the side with the PC ports, and that just slides right into place. There we go. And so there it is. That is my second video on the Pentax MX in this video manual. It is a very small camera, very hard to hold in your hand because it is in fact tinier than the, never mind, I'm not going to do that again. So this is the Pentax MX video manual. If this video manual was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those below. If you have suggestions for other videos, I'm more than happy to make those if I have the technical know-how and equipment. And before we go, thank you guys for watching and take great photos. To put your viewfinder focusing screen back in or put a new one in, simply grab it, and you can see that there is a matte side and a glossy side. We're going to put it with a matte side down. Now you can use your fingers, but be careful not to touch the mirror when you do this. I didn't do that correctly. Matte side down is correct. There we go, almost in. And when you put it in, you want it to nest in that tray well. Mine does not want to nest well. All right, we're going to try this again.